There are books that are not buried because they are wrong, but because they speak of things people are not yet ready to face. The Book of Enoch belongs to that kind. It did not disappear into the dust of time. It was simply pushed to the margins, left outside the light of official doctrine, like a bearer of bad news standing at the city gate. It was not destroyed, but it was not allowed to enter, and because of that, its story still smolders, like embers beneath the cold ash of history. When people open the familiar Bible, they see stories arranged neatly, with order, with clear beginnings and endings. But before everything was sealed as standard, there were other voices. Voices that spoke of angels who did not only sing hymns, but also knew desire. Voices that spoke of humanity not only as victims of sin, but sometimes as accomplices. Voices that spoke of knowledge as something that was not always a blessing. The Book of Enoch steps out from that space, the space of uncomfortable questions. People often say this is a book about fallen angels and giants, but seeing it that way is still superficial. Deeper than that, it is a story about boundaries. The boundary between heaven and earth. The boundary between what is permitted and what is forbidden. The boundary between the hunger to understand and the arrogance of wanting to seize the authority of God. And it is also the fragile boundary within the human heart, where light and darkness are never completely separated. The Book of Enoch did not emerge from a peaceful world. It was born in an age when faith was violently shaken. The Jewish people once believed they were the chosen ones, that the temple was the dwelling place of God, that the order of the world had clear meaning. Then everything collapsed. The temple was destroyed. They were exiled, forced to live among foreign cultures. When they returned, the world was no longer the same, and neither were they. The question was no longer, does God exist? But if he exists, why did he allow this to happen? In that void, people began to look to the heavens more often, not only to pray, but to seek explanations. They believed that behind the upheavals on earth were movements above, that war, famine, and injustice were not only matters of kings and empires, but were also tied to invisible powers. The Book of Enoch says openly what many only dared to think in silence, that some things had gone wrong from the very levels of heaven. The name Enoch appears in Genesis like a passing shadow, a short sentence almost offering no explanation at all. Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more because God took him away. A line like that is enough to keep the curious awake at night. What does it mean to walk with God? Where was he taken? Why did others die, while he did not? The Book of Enoch begins precisely from that gap, from the silence that the canonical scripture left behind. In this story, Enoch is not the strongest man, nor a king or a warrior. He is an observer, a listener, a recorder. He sees the world not only with physical eyes, but with another kind of awareness. And what he sees is not comforting. Instead of a smoothly functioning universe, he sees cracks. Instead of perfect order, he sees abuse of power. Instead of pure angels, he sees beings created from light who learn to crave darkness. There is a very clear feeling in the opening lines of the Book of Enoch, the feeling that humanity is not alone in its tragedy, that evil does not arise only from the human heart, but has been nurtured from a higher place. This is what makes many people uneasy, because if evil is only a human fault, then we can still try to fix ourselves. But if evil has a more complex origin, involving even beings called heavenly, then the story of responsibility becomes far heavier. The Book of Enoch does not try to comfort the reader. It does not say that everything will be fine as long as you behave. It presents a harsh reality, that the world was distorted very early on, and human beings are born into an order that is no longer whole, but at the same time it quietly suggests that if things can be broken, they can also be repaired. Not easily, not quickly, but possibly. Perhaps that is why this book was considered dangerous. It does not only tell a story, it shakes the foundations of false comfort. It forces people to ask themselves what in their faith comes from God, and what has been rearranged by humans to make it easier to breathe. It does not oppose faith, but it does not submit to comfort. And in many ages, that was the greatest crime. The Book of Enoch is like a locked door, yet the key is still in the reader's hand. To open it is to accept that the story of human origins is more complex than what we were taught. That good and evil are not simply two clear colors, but intertwined currents. And that some truths are not hidden to protect humanity, but to protect structures of power. When stepping into this story, no one is promised safety. There is only a silent invitation. Listen, not to believe immediately, but to understand why the ancients trembled as they wrote these lines. Because sometimes, the most frightening thing is not fallen angels or giants, but the human capacity to realize that the world they live in is not as simple as they once believed. The world in which the Book of Enoch raises its voice is not a static picture, but a prolonged shock. When the Jewish people returned from Babylon, they carried more than luggage. They carried broken memories, songs sung through tears, and a faith that had been tested by fire. The God they once knew seemed to have been silent for too long. The temple that was once the center of the spiritual universe was now only a pile of stones in memory. And when people rebuilt it, they realized that rebuilding walls was not the same as rebuilding faith. In that context, the greatest question was not law, but meaning. Why do the righteous still suffer? Why do the wicked still live in peace? Why does the covenant seem to no longer protect those who once trusted in it? These questions could not be answered with familiar teachings. They required another frame, another dimension. And that is when apocalyptic literature emerged, not as an escape, but as a bold explanation. The Book of Enoch says that human history is not written only on earth. It is co-written in heaven. What happens in the city, in the fields, in families also sends tremors through higher realms. This is not a way to escape responsibility, but a way to expand vision. When a child is born into violence, when a people is crushed by an empire, it is not only a political failure, it is a sign of an order damaged at its roots. In the worldview of the Book of Enoch, angels are not always perfect models. They have duties, authority, and also the capacity to fail. This overturns familiar thinking, because if even beings created to serve God can lose their way, then falling is not something strange, but a constant risk. And if that is so, humanity is not the sole center of sin, but part of a much larger story. It is precisely in that intersection that the figure of Enoch is brought forward. He does not appear as one who competes for power or seeks to fix the world through violence. He appears as a witness, someone who is led to see with his own eyes what most of humanity only senses vaguely. And what is notable is that Enoch does not seek this journey. He does not climb to heaven through ambition. He is called, as if someone needed a person quiet enough to see, honest enough to record. Enoch looks at the world with a different eye. When others see only disasters, he sees imbalance. When others see only violence, he sees the consequences of choices made long before. He does not stand outside humanity, but he does not sink into it either. He stands at the boundary, where questions are allowed to exist without needing immediate answers. There is something deeply human in the way the Book of Enoch tells Enoch's story. He is not described as fearless. On the contrary, many times he trembles before what he sees. This matters because it says that facing truth does not make people hard like iron. It makes them more fragile, but also more honest. Enoch is not given knowledge to boast, but to carry its weight. As the story flows, we begin to sense a quiet tension. Something has gone too far, a boundary has been crossed, and the world is living with the consequences of that. Even though most people do not know exactly where it began, the Book of Enoch does not rush to point fingers. It builds the sense that there is a great fracture in the order of creation, and that fracture did not appear by accident. This era is an era of mixture. Old law and new influences collide. Traditional faith and foreign philosophy stand side by side. People begin to ask questions they once did not dare to ask. And when the questions change, the old answers are no longer enough. The Book of Enoch does not offer a neat new doctrine. It offers a mirror, reflecting the chaos within and around humanity. Perhaps that is why this book is both attractive and frightening. It does not allow the reader to remain in a safe position. It pulls them into a conversation where no one holds absolute control. God remains at the center, but the path toward him is no longer straight. It is winding, full of questions, and sometimes passes through dark regions people do not want to admit are real. Enoch stands at that intersection between the pain of humanity and the holiness of the heavens. He has not said everything. He has only begun to see. But that very act of seeing is enough to change how people understand the world. Because when you realize that history is not only a chain of random events, but the result of moral choices amplified across many layers of reality, you cannot return to the old way of seeing. And then, in the silence between heaven and earth, a movement begins. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle disturbance, like when a calm surface of water begins to ripple because something has touched it from very high above. Those assigned to observe have watched for too long, and what they have seen has changed them. There is a moment in this story when the sky no longer stands still, not because of thunder or fire from above, but because of a gaze. Those called the Watchers, the angels appointed to observe humanity, looked too closely at what did not belong to them. At first, it was only curiosity. Then curiosity became attention. Attention turned into desire. And desire, when left undisciplined, always seeks to justify itself. They looked at humans not as God looked. They did not see fragility that needed protection, but beauty to be taken. In the Book of Enoch, sin does not fall like a sudden bolt of lightning. It slides downward, slowly, with reasons, with compromises. And that is what makes it dangerous, because evil rarely appears with a terrifying face from the beginning. It often arrives in the shape of a reasonable thought. Mount Hermon becomes the meeting place of an irreversible decision. The Watchers gather, not in panic, but in calculation. They know what they are about to do is wrong, and precisely because they know, they need each other to do it. The oath they swear is not to show loyalty, but to divide guilt evenly. When everyone falls together, no one has to face it alone. That logic is very familiar, not only to angels, but to humans in every age. In that moment, order is bent, not by force, but by choice. The Book of Enoch does not blame desire as a blind instinct. It describes desire as something thought through, discussed, legalized, and because of that, its consequence is not merely a personal mistake, but a fracture in the structure of the world. Enoch, in his role as the one who sees, does not recount this with satisfaction. There is a sorrow running through the lines, as if he is witnessing a tragedy that could have been avoided. The Watchers are not deceived. They are not forced. They step across the boundary with full awareness, and that is what makes their fall far heavier. When they abandon their position, not only heaven is affected, the earth begins to tremble as well. The union between angels and human women is not described as a romantic love. It is described as a violation. something entering a space where it is not permitted to exist. And from there, children are born who belong to no order that ever existed. But before speaking of consequences, the Book of Enoch forces the reader to look directly at motive. Why are beings created from light drawn to darkness? The answer is not simple. Perhaps because when you are placed too high, you begin to wonder what it feels like to fall. Perhaps because observing for too long without participating twists desire. And perhaps because freedom, whether in heaven or on earth, always comes with risk. There are moments when reading this, one cannot help but see oneself in the story, because what happens on Mount Hermon is not unfamiliar. Humans are the same. They are given roles, responsibilities, limits, and very often they look beyond those limits, not because they lack, but because they want more. If you are listening to this and feel certain thoughts or questions stirring inside, do not rush to push them away. Perhaps those reactions show that this story is still alive. The Book of Enoch does not ask the reader to take sides. It does not tell you to hate the watchers or to pity them. It only asks you to look closely at how a small decision, when made collective, can create enormous shock. And if you find these things touching your own experience, sharing those thoughts with others can sometimes be a way to understand yourself more clearly. Quiet conversations are often where truth begins to take shape. When the watchers fall, they do not fall into emptiness. They descend into a world already filled with tensions, desires, and wounds, and their presence is like pouring oil onto a fire. The Book of Enoch suggests that evil is rarely created from nothing. It is often triggered, amplified, and accelerated by new forces entering an already fragile system. Enoch records everything, without editing, without softening. He does not embellish to make the story more dramatic. The truth itself is heavy enough. And it is precisely this directness that makes the book difficult for many later generations to accept, because it does not allow people to place all blame on humanity, nor does it allow them to idealize the heavenly realm. It places both under the same severe light. One striking thing is that the Book of Enoch does not describe God intervening immediately. There is no instant flash of punishment, no command of lightning from above. Everything is allowed to unfold, as if freedom must go to its very end to reveal its true nature. And in that silence, consequences begin to form, slowly but surely. As the story continues to flow, the listener begins to sense that the worst has not yet appeared. What the watchers have done is only the spark. What is about to be born from their choice will force both heaven and earth to respond. And Enoch, with all that he has seen, knows that the world will no longer be the same. If you are still staying with this story at this point, it may not be out of simple curiosity. It may be because of a familiar feeling that the boundary between right and wrong, between what is permitted and what is forbidden, has never been simple. And if you wish to continue digging into those layers of meaning, following this journey to the end may open far more than you expect. When the boundary has been crossed, the world does not collapse immediately. It changes first, a change difficult to see with the naked eye, but enough to shift everything off course. The children born from the union of the Watchers and human women grow at a frightening speed. They are not like other children, not only because of their immense bodies, but because of how they occupy space, as if the earth was never prepared to contain them. The Book of Enoch calls them the Nephilim, a name that does not carry beauty, but weight. They are not described as legendary heroes or guardian gods. They are described as consequences of a distorted order. When you mix things that were never designed to merge, the result is rarely harmony. The Nephilim are living proof of that. At first, humanity is astonished. The strength of the Nephilim terrifies many, but also earns admiration from others. Perhaps people thought these beings would protect them, would help them dominate nature, would offer advantage in an unstable world. But very quickly, the truth emerges. The giants do not come to serve. They come to consume. They eat more than humans can provide. They use their strength not to build, but to take. When resources run dry, when food is no longer enough, they do not retreat. They turn on the very people who gave birth to them. In this story, there is no safe distance between the creator of the problem and its victim. Everything overlaps, forming a spiral with no escape. Enoch records these scenes with a clear heaviness, not through graphic violence, but through a sense of helplessness. Humanity no longer controls what it once accepted. What was first seen as a blessing reveals itself as a burden too heavy to bear. And when power is not paired with responsibility, it always seeks self-satisfaction, regardless of consequence. But the Nephilim do not destroy only through their bodies. Their presence distorts morality. When the strong live by taking from the weak, it slowly becomes normal. Violence is no longer the exception, but the method of survival. Humans learn to fear, then learn to imitate. The world begins to reflect the very thing that has invaded it. There is something striking in how the Book of Enoch portrays the Nephilim. They are not seen as purely evil in a simple sense. They act according to the nature of something that belongs nowhere, not fully angel and not fully human. They have no clear place in the order of creation, and it is precisely this rootlessness that makes them dangerous. This touches a very deep human fear, the fear of things without place, without limits, without clear responsibility. When a being does not know where it belongs, it creates a place by taking the place of others. The Nephilim do this on a massive scale, but the logic itself is not unfamiliar in daily life. While humanity struggles to survive, the Watchers begin to realize they have created something beyond control, but regret, if it exists, comes too late. They have left the role of observers to become agents. And once they become agents, they can no longer return to neutrality. The Book of Enoch does not portray them as naive beings swept along. It reveals a bitter irony. Those who believed they understood humanity best are the ones who harmed them most. The earth, in this story, is not only a stage, it is a victim. Blood spills onto the ground, cries soak into the soil. Violence does not disappear with each generation, it accumulates. And when that accumulation reaches an unbearable level, it begins to react, not with words, but with groans that only those who truly listen can sense. Enoch is one of the few who can listen. He does not stand in the middle of battle, he stands at the edge, seeing the repeating pattern of collapse. And what makes this story heavy is the sense that no one truly controls the situation anymore. Not humanity, not the Watchers. And God remains silent. That silence is not indifference. It is like a pause before a decision that cannot be taken back. In that pause, the world continues to slide. And with each passing day, the cost grows higher. The Book of Enoch does not hide this truth. It does not rush to offer salvation to ease the reader. It forces them to remain with the discomfort a little longer. Perhaps that is why this story still carries weight today. It does not only speak of giant beings who once walked the earth. It speaks of irreversible consequences when boundaries are ignored. It speaks of creating something we are not ready to take responsibility for. And it asks a quiet but persistent question. When everything is beyond control, who will step forward to repair it? When violence has become the common language, when life is consumed like a resource, the world moves closer to a breaking point. And at that point, not only humans begin to cry out. Those cries, though drowned by the chaos below, eventually reach higher realms, where the silence is about to end. There is a limit that even silence cannot cross. When violence covers the face of the earth, when human cries have nowhere left to fall, they begin to rise, not like polished prayers, but like choked screams, broken, yet real enough to not be ignored. The Book of Enoch says that the earth was filled with blood, and when the ground is full of blood, heaven cannot pretend not to see. Those cries do not go straight to God. They are first heard by the archangels, those who still stand firm within the original order. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, names without vagueness. They are not only messengers, but witnesses. They see what the Watchers have done. They see what the Nephilim have caused, and they see humanity crushed in between with no way out. The scene is described like a court without walls. No gavel strikes, no defense attorneys, only truth laid bare. The archangels do not decorate, do not soften. They recount the corruption of the world as it truly is. And what is notable is that they do not speak only of consequences, but of causes, of how the Watchers exceeded their authority, how they gave humanity things it was not ready to carry. God, in the Book of Enoch, does not appear as a distant king. He is described as one who grieves over the distortion of his creation. This is not a burst of sudden rage. It feels like a decision made after every other possibility has been exhausted, and that is what makes the judgment heavier. The command is given without hesitation. The Watchers will be bound, stripped of the freedom they abused. Not all are destroyed immediately, but imprisoned in darkness, awaiting the final judgment. The Book of Enoch does not frame this as revenge, but as containment. A new boundary is set so the fall does not continue to spread. For the Nephilim, the judgment is harsher. They are not permitted to continue existing, not because they are evil in a simple human sense, but because their existence is an unfixable distortion within the order of creation. The world cannot heal as long as they remain, and so their destruction is decreed as part of a cleansing process. But the greatest judgment is not aimed directly at angels or giants. It is aimed at the entire earth. A flood is prepared, not only to wash away flesh, but to erase the traces of corruption that have soaked deep. In the Book of Enoch, the great flood is not an impulsive act of anger. It is the final measure of an order trying to save itself. This makes many people uncomfortable because it raises a difficult question. Why do the innocent also suffer? Why must cleansing pass through such immense pain? The Book of Enoch does not offer an easy answer. It does not say everything is fair in a narrow sense. It only says that there are moments when the damage has spread too far to be repaired piece by piece. Enoch, in all of this, does not play the role of judge. He is the one who is shown, and what he sees does not satisfy him. It makes him tremble, not only because of the power of God, but because of the severity of choices made long before. This story does not blame a single moment. It shines light on a long chain of compromises. There is a quiet but powerful detail in the Book of Enoch. When judgment is given, humanity is not described as completely unaware. They have lived in violence long enough to consider it normal. They have benefited from the strength of the Nephilim before being crushed by that same strength. This does not make them perpetrators in the same way, but it does not leave them entirely outside responsibility either. God's intervention in this story does not erase free will. It resets boundaries. It says that some things, even when freely chosen, cannot be allowed to exist forever. And those boundaries are not set to control, but to protect what remains of life. Sometimes, to save something, you must accept losing many other things. The atmosphere of the story begins to shift from here. It is no longer only a downward slide without breaks. There is a direction, though painful. There is movement from chaos toward judgment, but this judgment is not the end. It is preparation for something else. another phase in the relationship between heaven and earth. Enoch senses that the world is standing before a new boundary, not the boundary the watchers crossed, but one set again by God himself. And this time, the cost of ignoring it has been written too clearly. No longer a vague warning, but a collective memory to be passed down through generations. Within the heaviness of judgment, there is still a small spark of hope. Not everyone is destroyed. Not everything is erased. The Book of Enoch suggests that cleansing always comes with the preservation of a seed, a possibility of beginning again. But to understand that, one must look beyond the moment of judgment toward what Enoch is about to be shown next. Because once heaven has spoken, once order has been restored through power, the next question is no longer who was wrong, who was right. It is how the world after judgment will function, and whether humanity, if given another chance, will live differently or walk the same path once more. After the judgment, light does not flood in immediately. First comes movement, an upward movement, as Enoch is called out of the familiar human space to step into layers of reality that words are often not enough to describe. He does not ascend like a victor, nor like one being rewarded. He ascends like a summoned witness, carrying the weight of what has happened on earth. Enoch's journey is not a single continuous path, but a sequence of layers being opened. Each layer reveals a world far wider than what humans are used to imagining. At the very first level, he realizes that nature does not operate randomly. Wind, rain, snow, mist all follow an order, not the cold order of machinery, but an order maintained by conscious forces. This changes the way disasters are seen. What humans call calamities are not simply accidents, but signs of a balance being pushed to its limit. As Enoch is led further, he sees the storehouses of the world, not treasures of gold and silver, but storehouses of the elements, things that sustain life and can also destroy it. There he understands that power does not lie in display, but in restraint. Rain falls only when permitted. Wind blows fiercely only when needed. And when these limits are broken, consequences spread downward very quickly. Then the scene shifts. The light softens, and Enoch is led to the place where those who once stood above are held. The fallen angels are bound not because they are weak, but because they used strength the wrong way. The binding here is not only chains, but the removal of influence. They no longer observe, no longer teach, no longer intervene. What remains to them is the memory of the position they have lost. Enoch does not look upon this with satisfaction. There is a quiet fear when he realizes that freedom, when not paired with discipline, turns into a prison. Those who once crossed boundaries are now held by those very boundaries, not for revenge, but so the remaining world can breathe. As Enoch is led farther, he sees a place that is familiar in a painful way, the Garden of Eden, not as children's stories often tell it, but as an unhealed memory. It is beautiful, but not carefree. It is quiet, but not untouched. Enoch sees that Eden is not only a location, but a state of relationship. When that relationship breaks, Eden does not disappear. It becomes unreachable. This vision carries a heavy message. Loss is not only being driven out of a place, it is knowing that a better state once existed, and that humanity once lived within it. The Book of Enoch does not tell the fall as a random accident. It tells it as the result of choice. And because it is choice, it leaves memory, not only consequence. The journey continues, and Enoch is shown the heavenly bodies moving with rhythms so precise they are almost beyond belief. The sun, the moon, the cycles of day and night, the seasons, all of these are not only natural phenomena, but reminders that time itself has a moral order. When humans live out of step with that rhythm, they do not only grow weary, They break a deeper harmony they cannot see. In the way the Book of Enoch describes it, the heavenly realm is not distant from reality. It is tightly connected to life on earth. When violence increases, balance is shaken. When greed spreads, rhythm is disrupted. This makes the story uncomfortable because it does not allow humans to place all blame on fate or invisible powers. It suggests that what happens above reflects what happens within the human heart. Enoch gradually understands that this journey is not only for him to witness God's power, but to understand the structure of responsibility. Each level he passes through shows that no action is small. No choice affects only one individual. Everything leaves a mark, whether in nature, in society, or in spaces humans rarely consider. There is a particular stillness in the higher realms, not an empty silence, but the silence of awareness. There, few explanations are needed. Everything appears exactly as it is. And within that silence, Enoch senses the distance between what humans think they understand and what is actually operating. The Book of Enoch does not turn this journey into a wondrous excursion. It is a process of stripping away illusion, layer by layer, so that when Enoch looks back at the earth from that distance, he no longer sees it only as the place where humans live. He sees a point of intersection of many forces, many choices, many overlapping consequences. And as Enoch is led even higher, he begins to sense that everything he has seen so far is only preparation. There is another layer of reality waiting, where not only order is revealed, but the intention behind that order will be uncovered, a place that speaks not only of what has happened, but of what will happen. His journey is not finished. It is only moving into another depth. And while Enoch continues onward, the earth below keeps turning, keeps living within the consequences of old choices, unaware that what has been seen above will soon return below as both warning and hope. The higher he goes, the stranger the space becomes, not in shape, but in feeling. Enoch realizes that the highest realms do not operate by familiar movement. There is no rushing, no waiting. Everything exists in a state that humans struggle to name, and within that state, Enoch is led to where the forces that keep the world from collapsing completely continue their work in silence. He sees angels who do not carry a majesty that forces humans to bow, but an absolute focus. They govern wind, clouds, rain, harvests, and small changes that, if shifted, would cause great consequence. Here, power is not shown through destructive force, but through patient maintenance. Every movement is weighed, every intervention has limits. This makes Enoch understand that chaos on earth is not because heaven has abandoned it, but because balance has been stretched to a dangerous point. There is a paradox in what he sees. The higher he ascends, the greater the power, yet the less display there is. No one there needs to prove who they are. Everything functions as if its purpose is already fully known, and that clarity highlights the confusion below. Humans and the Watchers acted as if there were no consequences, while the entire universe is held together by remembering consequences at all times. Enoch has shown that not all fallen angels are bound in the same way. Some are chained in deep darkness because their influence was too great and too dangerous, but others are left in a state of unease with no clear position, no defined role. Their greatest punishment is not physical pain, but the loss of meaning itself. This makes Enoch shudder, for he realizes that life needs not only freedom, but direction. When a being no longer knows why it exists, it begins to unravel from within. The Book of Enoch does not describe this in philosophical terms, but the feeling seeps through every image, a universe where everything has its place, and the fall begins with the refusal of that place. The deeper he goes, the more Enoch senses that every realm he has seen points toward one focus, not a location, but a reality. A place where every question of order, of justice, of suffering converges. No one leads him with words. He is led by presence. And as he draws closer, language begins to fail. The throne of God is not described as a specific object. It is the center of existence. The light there does not blind, it penetrates. It does not overwhelm the eyes, it reveals. Before that light, there is no place to hide and no place to justify. Enoch is not interrogated. He does not need to answer. Truth stands on its own, needing no defense. There is something very different from simple images of judgment. There are no shouts, no bursts of anger. There is severity, but the severity of what cannot be bent. Order here does not negotiate. It is not persuaded by tears or explanations. And because of that, it is not biased. Enoch senses that everything that has happened on earth has been seen, not as a list of sins, but as a chain of choices. Every small decision, every quiet compromise, every moment of looking away, nothing is overlooked, but nothing is exaggerated. Everything is placed in its rightful position, with its rightful weight. In that presence, Enoch understands that judgment is not an arbitrary act. It is the final consequence when every other path has been refused. It is the moment when truth can no longer be delayed. And what makes judgment frightening is not punishment, but absolute clarity. No one can say they did not know. There is a stillness so deep it feels as if time itself has stopped. Yet within that stillness, Enoch does not feel despair. Instead, he senses something close to hope, but not a cheap hope. It is a hope built on truth, not denial. A hope that when everything is called by its true name, the world can begin to heal. The Book of Enoch does not recount exactly what Enoch is told in this moment. Perhaps because no words are enough. Perhaps because these things are not meant to be read, but lived. What matters is not the detail, but the transformation. When Enoch leaves that presence, he no longer sees the world as before. He understands that human history does not move forward blindly. It passes through checkpoints, moments when truth must be faced. And each time, it is not only individuals who are weighed, but entire generations. What the Watchers did not affect only their time. It left long-lasting marks. And because of that, judgment had to be of equal weight. When Enoch is led away from the highest realm, he carries not knowledge to boast about, but the burden of understanding. He knows that what he has seen will not be easy to accept. It is too vast, too severe, too uncomfortable, but he also knows that silence would be worse, because truth left unspoken will find its way out through more distorted paths. The world below still does not know that something deeply important has been affirmed above. Judgment is not the end of the story. It is a turning point, and from that turning point, another horizon begins to appear, not only about destruction, but about what comes after, about how history will be guided once order has been restored. Enoch prepares to return to his role, not to change the judgment, but to bear witness. And it is this testimony that will open the next part of the story, where the future is no longer vague, but gradually taking shape, with all its severity and its invitation. When Enoch is taken out of the highest realm, he does not fall back to earth like someone waking from a dream. He carries the sense that the future has already begun before humanity realizes it. What is about to happen is not a sudden reaction, but a result shaped by choices accumulated across generations. And because of that, the vision opened before him is not vague, not symbolic in a way that avoids truth, but clear enough to make one step back. The images of the last days do not appear as a single picture. They come in waves, in rhythms, like successive tides. Enoch sees war beginning not from explosive hatred, but from fractures within the human heart, when trust is eroded, when justice is bought and sold, when truth is bent to serve interest. Violence needs no invitation. It finds its own way to appear. He sees nations rising against one another, not only for land or power, but because they no longer share a moral language. Brothers turn away from each other, families divide. Relationships that once formed the foundation of society are replaced by constant suspicion. In that world, people fear not only enemies outside, but also those who once stood beside them. Nature itself no longer remains neutral. The land becomes barren. Seasons turn unstable. Earthquakes do not only shake buildings, but shake the belief that the world is stable. Enoch does not see these disasters as random punishment. He sees them as echoes of imbalance carried for too long. When humanity lives as if the earth is only a resource to be exploited, the earth responds by reminding them that it is not endless. But what weighs heaviest on Enoch is not material ruin, it is inner decay. He sees a time when right and wrong are no longer clearly distinguished, when truth is called opinion, when evil is justified by circumstance. In that world, people no longer seek righteousness, but seek to rationalize themselves. And when everyone is right in their own way, no one remains truly responsible. The Book of Enoch does not tell these visions to create useless fear. It tells them to place a mirror before humanity. Because what Enoch sees is not unfamiliar. It does not belong to a distant future beyond reach. It is an amplification of tendencies that already exist. If one looks long enough, honestly enough, the seeds can be recognized in the present. Amid these dark images, Enoch also sees judgment, not as blind rage, but as final discernment. The wicked are not punished for being imperfect, but for stubbornly refusing to change. Judgment in the Book of Enoch is not for those who stumble and rise again, but for those who turn cruelty into a way of life, who turn violence into identity. The images of punishment are described with strong language, because they must be, to break indifference. But behind those images lies a clear message. No action disappears into nothingness. Every choice leaves a mark, and when the time comes, those marks are gathered, not to humiliate, but to be named. Yet the vision does not end there. Enoch sees those who endured in silence, those whose names were never written in chronicles of power, yet who kept faithfulness when no one was watching. He sees them lifted up, not as a reward for perfection, but as confirmation that righteousness, even when suppressed, is never forgotten. Images of resurrection appear not as cheap miracles, but as restoration of order. What was buried by injustice is brought into the light. What was dismissed is returned its value. The Book of Enoch shows that hope is not denial of pain, but affirmation that pain does not have the right to define the ending. Notably, Enoch is not told when all this will happen. There is no date, no schedule. Time in this story is not used to satisfy curiosity, but to test how one lives. Because when people know the exact moment, they tend to delay change. When they do not know, every day becomes both opportunity and responsibility. As Enoch looks back on everything he has been shown, he understands that the future is not a fixed sentence. It is a direction strengthened or redirected by how people live in the present. The Book of Enoch does not lock fate in place. It opens a space where choice still matters, even while the weight of past choices remains heavy. There is severity throughout this vision, but not despair. It is like the voice of someone who no longer has time to speak gently, a reminder that the world cannot continue as it is without cost, and that change, if it comes, does not begin with grand declarations, but with small decisions repeated with honesty. Enoch carries these visions not to spread fear, but to awaken. He knows many will refuse to listen, will say these things are too heavy, too extreme, but he also knows that truth ignored does not disappear. It only finds ways to return through more painful paths. As he prepares to return to his role, Enoch understands that this story does not belong to him alone. It is given to humanity as an uncomfortable but necessary invitation, an invitation to look directly at consequence, and from there to choose differently while it is still possible. And in the silence before that voice rises among humanity, one question hangs, not needing an immediate answer, but impossible to ignore. If the world is moving toward a breaking point, is each person helping push it faster or trying to hold it back through their choices? When the visions of the future begin to settle, what remains in Enoch is not fear, but clarity. He understands that what he has seen is not meant to satisfy curiosity about the end of days, but to illuminate the present, because the end does not begin with fire from heaven, but with small compromises in the human heart. And it is precisely there that this story moves closer to every individual who is living. Enoch is shown that judgment does not unfold as a random moment. It unfolds as a process of separation, not between perfect people and failures, but between those who are still willing to listen and those who have sealed their conscience shut. Evil, in the Book of Enoch, is not defined by a single wrong act, but by prolonged stubbornness. They know what is right, but choose what is convenient. They hear warnings, but label them as extreme. The images of punishment are told in heavy language, not to satisfy bloodlust, but to break indifference. When Enoch sees those who sow violence being drawn into that same violence, he does not see cheap justice. He sees a strict law. What humans nurture will eventually shape where they stand. No one is pushed into darkness by accident. Darkness is built slowly, through choices that go unquestioned. At the same time, Enoch sees something else. He sees those who lived quietly, unrecognized, without power to impose their will on others. They are not perfect, but they did not sell their souls for temporary safety. They preserved something fragile in a world full of pressure, the ability to say no when everyone else said yes. The resurrection of the righteous is not described as a loud celebration. It is quiet, but firm, not because they were more deserving by human standards, but because they did not lose their direction. The Book of Enoch shows that resurrection is not only about life after death. It is the restoration of right order. What was suppressed is returned to its place. What was distorted is straightened, even though the process is never easy. There is an important detail in how Enoch sees the final separation. He does not see people judged in absolute isolation. They are seen in relation to what they have influenced, how their family was shaped, how their community formed them, and how they contributed to the shared world. This turns judgment from a purely individual story into a story of interconnectedness. The Book of Enoch does not allow the reader to retreat into the idea that living only for oneself is enough. It says that no one exists in isolation. Choices that seem private have wider reach than we imagine. And when the time comes, those threads of connection will be brought into the light, revealing who upheld life and who suffocated it. Enoch understands that his role is not to predict dates, nor to build a system of fear. He is given a heavier task, to bear witness that justice is not an abstract idea. It is a reality moving forward, slowly, resisted yet unstoppable. Ignoring it does not make it disappear. It only makes the collision more painful. There is a very different seriousness in how the Book of Enoch speaks about hope. Hope does not lie in avoiding judgment, but in allowing judgment to reveal the truth needed for healing. There is no restoration without confrontation. There is no lasting future if the past is buried without being named. This is a difficult message, but also the only one strong enough to change direction. When Enoch looks back on the journey he has taken, he sees a straight line running through it all, from the fall of the Watchers, to the violence of the Nephilim, to the corruption of humanity, then to judgment and the vision of restoration. Nothing is random. Everything is connected through moral choices. And it is this connection that makes the story impossible to dismiss as harmless myth. Enoch carries an uncomfortable clarity. He knows many will want to cut away the difficult parts and keep only what comforts. But the Book of Enoch does not allow that kind of selection. It is either listened to in full or rejected entirely. And perhaps that is why it was pushed to the margins, because it does not serve the need to feel safe. It serves the need to be awakened. The world after these visions is not promised to be easier to live in. It is only promised to be more honest. And within that honesty, humanity is given responsibility again, not the responsibility to carry all the guilt of the universe, but the responsibility to live in alignment with what they know. Because once light has been seen, no one can excuse choosing darkness. Enoch prepares to complete his testimony, not by concluding everything, but by leaving a space that must be filled by the actions of the listener. This story does not end when the telling stops. It continues in how each person responds to it, in how they face power, knowledge, and the freedom placed in their hands each day. And it is there that the story of Enoch leaves the page and enters life, not loudly, not by force, but clear enough that it cannot be pretended it was never heard. When the testimony of Enoch reaches its final point, there is no sound of a book closing. There is only another silence, deeper, like the moment after a truth has just been spoken and no one knows how to respond. Because this story was never written to end neatly. It was written to remain, to linger, to force the listener to carry it longer than they want. Enoch does not appear as the founder of a new sect, nor as the keeper of the key to the end of the world. He appears as a witness who has seen too much to return to living as if he never knew. And that is the greatest burden, not punishment, not fear, but knowledge that cannot be pushed away. Once someone has seen how order is broken and how it is set again, they can no longer pretend that everything is random. There is a thread running through the entire story, from the fall of the angels to the final judgment. It is responsibility. No one in the Book of Enoch is condemned simply for existing. They are judged for how they used what was entrusted to them. The Watchers were given the task of observing, but they chose to take. Humanity was given knowledge, but used it to dominate one another. Power, when not anchored in morality, always finds a way to become destructive. The Book of Enoch does not hate knowledge. It warns about knowledge given at the wrong time, with the wrong motive, and without limits. This is what allows the story to move far beyond its ancient setting. Because every age has its new forms of knowledge, new tools, new abilities. And the old question returns again, only in a different shape. Are we using these things to serve life or to feed control and arrogance? Perhaps that is why this book never truly disappeared. Even though it was excluded from official canon, it was copied by hand, passed by word of mouth, preserved in communities at the margins. Not because it was easy to hear, but because it spoke directly to what humanity must always face. In every era, the tension between freedom and limits, between the desire to rise and the risk of losing oneself. Enoch, in his final role, does not stand above to teach. He stands alongside the listener, because what he brings back is not privilege, but a warning meant for everyone. No one is exempt because they belong to the right group, the right belief, or the right tradition. In the Book of Enoch, the only thing weighed is how people live with what they know. There is a quiet sadness in the way the story closes. not the sadness of despair, but the sadness of someone who understands that history tends to repeat itself. That what has happened once can happen again. If the lessons are ignored, the Watchers did not fall because they lacked information, but because they believed they could cross boundaries without paying a price. And that belief has never left the human world. The Book of Enoch does not demand that the listener believe every detail literally. It asks for honesty in facing the core message, that the world does not collapse simply because evil exists, but because evil is allowed to exist without being challenged. That judgment is not the act of a fickle God, but the final point of a chain of choices stretched for too long. What makes this story different from many other apocalyptic stories is that it does not slam the door on hope. But hope here is not comfortable. It does not say everything will be fine without change. It says everything can only be healed when truth is faced, when responsibility is accepted, when humanity stops placing all blame on heaven, on fate, on invisible forces, and begins to look at how it is using the freedom placed in its hands. Enoch does not leave humanity a new system of laws. He leaves a living question, a question that cannot be answered with words, but with life. When power is in our hands, even the smallest power, do we use it to support or to manipulate? When we have knowledge, do we use it to serve or to dominate? When we stand at a boundary, do we respect it or try to bend it to suit ourselves? Perhaps it was precisely these questions that made the Book of Enoch seem too dangerous, because it does not allow people to hide behind outward obedience. It does not allow faith to exist only on the lips. It forces faith down into the hands, into the feet, into concrete decisions, and that always unsettles systems that prefer stability over truth. When the story closes, Enoch does not vanish as a distant legend. He remains as one who has seen and has spoken, and the responsibility now no longer rests with him, but with those who hear this story. Because once it has been heard, no one is completely innocent. No one can say they did not know how far the world can drift, and no one can say there is no other path. The Book of Enoch ends not with an easy promise, but with a truth that must be lived, that heaven and earth are still connected, not by fear, but by responsibility. That freedom always comes with limits, and limits are not meant to suffocate life, but to protect it, and that every generation, whether it wants to or not, must answer the same question in a new form. This story does not demand immediate agreement. It only asks for honesty long enough to listen. And if anything remains after all of it, it is not images of fallen angels or Judgment Day, but the awareness that humanity always stands between heaven and earth, with the ability to draw them closer together or push them farther apart through the very ordinary choices of daily life. There, the Book of Enoch comes to a stop, not because it has said everything, but because what comes next cannot be written in its place. It must be lived.
Grateful that you chose to spend these moments in the light of this story. If it touched your soul, please like, share, and subscribe, and ring the bell so the next whisper of light may find its way back to you.